Chapter 5. The Gift.
It had been several weeks since her arrival at the Wolf Prince's palace. Aerith became used to the servants' antics and being freer-willed than her own. She was used to the head guard Vincent appearing unexpectedly as he made his rounds. She was even used to him disappearing when he would disappear after turning away for a mere second. Aerith became used to wandering the palace and chatting with Marlene, the only child in the entire palace. Marlene never fussed about being the only child, but Aerith was grateful there was someone she could talk to since the servants were unable to entertain her for more than a mere hour, if that. Everything seemed well for the princess except for one small detail. It was the fact that Prince Cloud always came to her room at night when the fire died and remained there until Aerith guessed sunrise. She did not dislike the prince. He was kind to her and never did anything inappropriate, yet she found sharing a bed with a person who she never seen as a man found her unnerving. The only thing she had ever seen was his wolf form, and whenever she asked about it, Cloud would always turn his attention elsewhere. The servants were no better. Aerith had tried on several occasions to find more information on the prince, but none of them would even give her an acceptable response. They either made a noise that either sounded as if they were choking or gurgling, or they would avoid her question completely. Aerith even tried asking Marlene, but she stated that she never knew that Prince Cloud was a human. Aerith assumed that the girl, being so young, perhaps forgotten how he looked like. Yet several more weeks passed. Aerith found herself spending more and more time in her room. She had walked the palace walls repeatedly, that she knew where each room was. She had read many of the books in the library and traveled many times into the garden. However, every day now seemed to drag on so much she felt homesick. She could have called the servants, but she did not want to disturb their work, since they always seemed busy. Marlene had her own chores to do, and Aerith did not want to get her scolded. As for Cloud, he was with her for every meal, unless something important happened, and was always with her at night. He was a prince, and she could not possibly disturb him. One afternoon, Aerith was wandering the palace gardens with Marlene. Marlene was collecting flowers and placed them in a basket Aerith had hanging from her elbow. Marlene was dressed in a simple white dress, her hair tied with a pink bow and wearing brown boots. Many times she dropped to her knees in the flower patches to pick up several flowers. When she would get up, her knees and skirt would be covered in dirt. Aerith smiled, remembering how much she used to enjoy playing in her garden before she was taught a proper ways to be a princess.
How are these ones?
As she was holding several blossoms in her fist, she held them as high as she could so Aerith could see.
They're perfect.
She took them from Marlene and placed them in a basket along with the others. As the two walked along the gardens, they came to a wall covered in thick ivy and tiny white purple flowers. Marlene was looking them over as well as Aerith, but nothing else caught her attention. Marlene looked up from the flowers and frowned.
I think they're too little.
As she looked up at Aerith, Aerith was staring up, but not at the ivy. She was staring above the wall. Marlene gently tugged at the skirt of her dress, breaking Aerith's gaze. Her emerald eyes looked down at the child.
What's wrong, Princess Aerith?
I'm sorry. I thought I heard something over the wall.
What did you hear?
I don't know. It just sounded like someone was over the side of the wall.
Maybe it was Prince Cloud. He leaves the castle a lot. He used to leave for days.
Why would he do that?
Marlene shook her head. Aerith placed the basket of flowers on the ground. She slipped off her slippers and grabbed hold of the ivy. She began pulling herself up when Marlene grabbed hold of her.
You can't leave the palace. The prince says so.
I'm not leaving. I just want to see what's on the other side.
But Prince Cloud said...
However, Aerith was not listening. She did not seem to care about the tiny detail that it was dangerous outside the palace walls. It was not as if she was leaving the palace. She was just going to peek over the walls. There was no harm in that. Aerith climbed the ivy carefully before lifting herself up on top the wall. She sat down, carefully keeping her dress tucked under her to keep from anything embarrassing from happening.
Princess, can you please come down now?
Oh, Molly, it looks so beautiful. When I came through the forest, I could not even see anything because the prince was moving so quickly. I never imagined something could look so beautiful.
Before her looked like something out of a book. The leaves were so green that when light reflected off them, it looked like emeralds, sparkling. Yet even before the forest, all around the castle were beautiful yellow and white flowers stretched to the forest edge. They looked like silver and gold. Aerith had never seen a forest or such a meadow, meaning that she had been confined to the palace as a child. She frowned, finding that even her new home she felt like a prisoner. Aerith climbed down after Marlene and began to protest louder. Her feet patted the ground as she landed on the stone path. She slipped her slippers back on and quickly smoothed out her dress.
The flowers were really lovely. I wonder why Prince Cloud won't let me outside.
It's dangerous out there. Big monster that will gobble you up.
Marlene made a scary face and stretched out her arms to emphasize how big the monsters were. As the two of them stood in the gardens. However, their laughter was short-lived when the sound of her father's voice called out to her.
Oh, Marlene!
I have to go. I'll see you tomorrow, right?
Aerith nodded and watched as Marlene ran off. As she began to head indoors, a noise caught her attention. Aerith looked up towards the wall. It seemed to be coming from the other side of the wall. Aerith looked back behind her and saw no one. Quietly, she slipped off her slippers once again, placed down her basket, and climbed to the top of the wall. Once she reached the top, she looked through the stretch of land for someone. When she did not spot someone, her eyes widened. There in the midst of the flowers was a man and woman. The man with dark brown hair, and a woman who looked exactly like her.
Mother? Father?
Feelings welled up inside the girl. Her mother and father were here? Had they been searching since the moment she left? Her mother and father were pleading for her to come to them. Their voices sounded tired and frail. Their clothes even seemed old and worn, and their hair seemed grayer. Without even considering Cloud's warning when she first arrived, Aerith was ready to leap from the wall to the other side. The moment she threw her body from the wall, an arm shot out, looping her by the waist. It snatched her up and began pulling her away. As she lifted back over the wall and set roughly onto the ground.
No, let me go! My mother and father are there! They could be injured!
Silence, you foolish girl.
No! Please let me help them!
She slipped through her captor's grip, but before she could even take a step, he snatched her wrist and pulled her back.
You foolish girl! I said be quiet!
Aerith looked up to see Vincent staring at her with his deep, blood-red eyes. Aerith quivered under his gaze as he tugged her away from the wall, away from her parents.
You do not understand!
I know plenty. Had I not been watching, you would have been easy prey to the monsters that roam this area.
Vincent dragged her into the palace, ignoring her protest. He even ignored the fact that he was crushing her wrist. Her cries and rude treatment were enough to alert the other servants. One by one they followed Vincent and Aerith to the main dining hall. Vincent burst through the doors with Aerith in tow. The servants remained behind the doorway. Cloud turned his wolf head from the window he had been staring out of when he heard the commotion. Vincent forced the girl forward, causing her to stumble to the ground. From behind, Tifa and Elena were ready to argue about Vincent's treatment, but Sid had told them to watch their tongues. Cloud's sapphire eyes glared at Vincent. He did not approve of such treatment, obviously. Without so much as a word passing, Vincent could tell the wolf wanted an explanation.
I discovered her, climbing over the garden wall. Had I not been there, she would have jumped to her death.
Cloud's eyes reverted to the princess who was lying on the ground. His eyes were cold as ice. His fur was standing on end.
Leave us!
He did not even look up at his servants. His voice was not a request. It was a command and was absolute. No one even attempted to say anything. Vincent swept out of the room, his red cloak trailing him. When he exited the room, he closed the doors behind him. Behind the lodge doors, however, none of the servants who had followed Vincent moved. They were worried and curious about what was going to happen. Aerith's emerald eyes could not look away from the prince. She could not. She felt he would attack her if she did. Cloud had never looked so ferocious before or towards her. The first and only time before she had witnessed such an angered look was when he had threatened her father.
I warned you not to leave the palace grounds!
But my mother and father were...
It was a trick, you thoughtless little girl!
Aerith winced. Cloud had called her a woman before when they first arrived. To be called a little girl hurt her.
The creatures outside my palace are dangerous and clever creatures that will lure you out of the safety of the palace. They will not hesitate to kill you, and yet you, naive little child, ignore my warnings. You swore to me, princess, that you would remain here.
I would not have left. I have not seen nor heard from my father and mother for weeks.
As you promised!
Cloud turned his back to her and took several steps away from her.
Why is it you can come and go as you please?
My reasons are my own.
Why is it you hide something from me?
Aerith stood up from the ground. She was furious. She was tired of receiving the same answer to her questions. Answers that did anything but answer a question.
I've been trapped here as a prisoner. I am kept in a room with no windows and such poor lighting. I am supposed to accept the fact that you must be in my room every night and understand that you are a man and not a wolf. And yet you refuse to show me your true form. I have not seen my mother and father since the day you came to my home. I did not even say goodbye to them.
You will understand in time.
But I want to understand in time. I cannot or will not accept this.
Aerith felt hot tears pour from her eyes. A sob escaped her lips and she fled from the wolf. Cloud looked back towards her, watching her run to the door and pull them open. She pushed through the servants who had piled themselves at the door to hear the conversation. Cloud returned to the window, staring. Quietly, and yet forcefully, Zack approached the prince. They all had the same concerns, and yet they chose Zack to be the one to share it with the prince. Zack nervously rubbed his neck, a frown on his face. After a moment, he joined Cloud at the window, but was looking at the prince and not outside.
Your Highness, the princess is quite upset.
I noticed.
Zack looked back at his friends, who were urging him to continue.
Your Highness, Princess Aerith cannot possibly just accept everything blindly. She wants answers that neither you, I, or anyone in this palace can answer.
I would tell her everything if I could. I would do anything not to hear her crying. I can only hope she will accept the truth otherwise.
Perhaps you should speak to her. Show her compassion. Allow her to visit her family.
Turning his eyes from the window to stare at his servant, his eyes narrowed at her.
You know I cannot do that.
Prince, how long do you think Princess Aerith will remain happy if you keep her trapped here like a prisoner? She is neither a girl nor a woman. You expect her to understand things while treating her like a child.
She made a promise to me.
A promise to save someone she loved. She promised to come here and stay with you. Yes, I know. But if you are asking her to be your companion, she will not do it out of her own free will, but out of a promise.
The prince looked down. He spoke no more, but made a swift exit. In her chambers, Aerith was sitting on the floor, her back against the bed. She was holding a pillow to her chest as she watched the fire slowly dim. She forced herself to stop crying. She knew that the prince would somehow hear her sobs, and she did not want him to see her like this. She did not even want the servants to see her sobbing like a child. Food was brought to her room when she refused to come down for dinner. However, it remained untouched. She never felt lonely in her life. She made a promise to Cloud, though, and that was the only thing keeping her here, a promise to save a life. The fire was nearly out when Cloud entered the room. His back fur seemed to glisten in the faint light. Aerith watched him over her pillow. In his mouth he was carrying something, a box of some sort. He stopped in front of the table full of food. He placed the box on the edge of it. He studied the food on the table, finding them untouched.
You should eat.
I am not hungry.
Cloud moved towards her. He leaned towards her, brushing his head along her gently.
I'm sorry, but it pains me to hear you cry.
Aerith remained silent.
Princess, why did you honor our agreement?
Aerith looked at him, her emerald eyes solemn.
To save a life.
You will save many lives if you honor that agreement.
A puzzled look came across her face. Aerith did not know what he meant by that. She figured, though, if she asked, she would just get the same answer she always would get. She simply nodded. Cloud moved from her to retrieve the box he had carried with him. He placed it in front of the princess and sat down on the ground. She was reluctant to take it, but did not want to be rude. The box was velvet. She placed her hand over the lid and opened the box. When she peered inside, she pulled out a long silver chain with a tiny pendant hanging from it. The pendant was also silver with a single pale green orb hanging from the end.
It's lovely.
It is yours.
I cannot.
It is yours now.
Aerith stared at the fine piece of jewelry.
Please wear it.
Hesitating, she looked at Cloud. His request sounded almost like a plea. Carefully, she slipped the long chain over her head and allowed it to rest around her. The pendant came down, resting just above her breast.
It suits you.
Thank you.
Aerith knew to always be polite. Cloud nodded. He rested next to Aerith. Aerith remained quiet, making Cloud nervous.
Princess, if I allow you a visit to your family, will you promise to return here?
Yes, of course.
She looked at him, hope filling her eyes.
If I allow you to go, it will be several days, maybe weeks until the preparations can be met. Is that to your satisfactory?
Yes, yes!
Then it shall be done, Princess.
She cried of joy before hugging the ebony wolf to her. Cloud allowed the hug. After the two talked happily with one another until Aerith drifted off to sleep, her head resting on Cloud's body. His soft fur made an excellent pillow, and he did not mind. He allowed the beautiful princess to sleep. He watched her sleep, gazing at her lovingly. His eyes shifted to the fire as the last bits of ember faded. When the fire burnt out, Cloud slipped from his pelt and carried the princess to her bed. After carefully tucking her under the covers, he rested next to her. He placed an arm protectively over her. Quietly he stared at her, his eyes clearly able to see her in the dark, even in this form. She was beautiful. Cloud found himself wanting to kiss her, a desire he thought of often while he was with her. Yet he swore he would not do anything to dishonor her, and he meant it. Carefully he leaned forward and kissed her cheek. In her sleep, before turning to her side, her front facing the prince, Cloud pulled her close to his body, letting out a small sigh. Aerith snuggled against his chest as Cloud held her protectively.